Hello, it's Nicole Witt, your miracle mentor. And today we are looking at A Course in Miracles. We are in chapter 4, The Illusions of the Ego. And we're in section 2, The Ego and False Autonomy. It's kind of a long section, so we're just going to jump right in and see what comes up. It is reasonable to ask how the mind could ever have made the ego. In fact, it is the best question you could ask. There is, however, no point in giving an answer in terms of the past because the past does not matter and history would not exist if the same errors were not being repeated in the present. Okay, so he's saying, we're not going to go back and figure out, really get onto this idea of well, why did we do this? How did it come to be? When did it come to be? How many millions of years has it? There's no point in going to the past. And the only reason that the past even, that we even have this idea of the past is because we're still making the same mistakes in the present. Okay. And believing there's a past is part of that, making that mistake in the present because there is no time. Abstract thought applies to knowledge because knowledge is completely impersonal and examples are irrelevant to its understanding. Perception, however, is always specific and therefore quite concrete. Okay? So knowledge is is abstract thought. It's not specific to anything because there are no specific things in it, right? That's all part of the ego illusion. Everyone makes an ego or a self for himself, which is subject to enormous variation because of its instability. We're all very unstable. I think I can definitely say that about myself. He also makes an ego for everyone else he perceives, which is equally variable, which is why sometimes we like somebody and sometimes we don't, and sometimes they bother us and sometimes they don't, because we've made an ego for them and it's unstable. There's no stability in it. Their interaction is a process. So their interaction, meaning the egos of me and the person I'm perceiving an ego for them. So their interaction, the two egos, is a process that alters both because they were not made by or with the unalterable. It is important to realize that this alteration can and does occur as readily when the interaction takes place in the mind as when it involves physical proximity. Okay, so I can change my mind about someone. I can be thinking about them, ruminating on a conversation we had, something that happened a minute ago, 20 years ago, whatever it is. It can all happen in my mind. The whole interaction is happening in my mind, and it can alter the way that I'm perceiving them. It can alter the way I feel about them. It can alter the way I think about them. They're not here except in my mind. Okay. So thinking about another ego is as effective in changing relative perception as is physical interaction. There can be no better example that the ego is only an idea and not a fact. The idea, the idea or the fact, or however the situation where I can change my perception of some person in my mind without them being anywhere near me in my proximity, has nothing to do with them, is the best example that there is. This is all in my mind, right? That everything that I perceive is in my mind. It's happening in my mind. Your own state of mind is a good example of how the ego was made. When you threw knowledge away, it is as if you never had it. This is so apparent that one need only recognize it to see that it does happen. If this occurs in the present, why is it surprising that it occurred in the past? So what he's saying here is how many times a day do I forget? It's getting less, right? But how many times a day, a week, a month do I find myself throwing away everything that I know to be true, that is the truth, that God is good, that I am not a victim of the world I see, that only my thoughts can hurt me. Like all of those things we learn in the lessons, in the workbook of A Course in Miracles. How many times do I just throw them away? Like I don't know them, right? I'm throwing away knowledge. So if I do it every day, multiple times a day, then, it's not surprising that I did it in the past at some point where this whole thing got started. It says, surprise is a reasonable response to the unfamiliar, though hardly to something that occurs with such persistence. Like, don't act surprised that I throw away knowledge all the time. But do not forget that the mind need not work that way, even though it does work that way now. Okay? So I forget repeatedly over and over again now. Like I said, it's getting less for sure. Like even in the past week, it's less. It's incredible to me. But so that proves to me that it doesn't have to work that way, right? Even though it does now. So there's hope. We can change it. Think of the love of animals for their offspring and the need they feel to protect them. That is because they regard them as part of themselves. No one dismisses something he considers part of himself. You react to your ego much as God does to his creations, with love, protection, and charity. Your reactions to the self you made are not surprising. In fact, they resemble in many ways how you will one day react to your real creations, which are as timeless as you are. Okay. So he's saying here, look, you made your ego, you made this self-image, you made yourself with the little s that's living in this world, doing all kinds of things. Like for me, this little self that's called Nicole Witt, and she's done this, she has a past, she wants to do like all of this stuff. And I treat it with love and charity. Like I want it to be good and I want to have a good life. And because I made it. So I want to treat it that way. But my real creations are the love that I've given, even when I don't know it. And that extension of love is my real creation. And someday I will value that more than what I think I've created for this character of Nicole Witt in the world. The question is not how you respond to the ego, but what you believe you are. Belief is an ego function, and as long as your origin is open to belief, you are regarding it from an ego viewpoint. When teaching is no longer necessary, you will merely know God. Belief that there is another way of perceiving is the loftiest idea of which ego thinking is capable. That is because it contains a hint of recognition that the ego is not the self. Okay, so belief is an ego function, and as long as we are open to believing that we are something other than created by God, then we're in ego. Undermining the ego's thought system must be perceived as painful, even though this is anything but true. And that's when he says it must be perceived as painful, I question that. I'm not going to question Jesus, but that seems a little odd to me that it must be, because other places in the Course he says it's usually experienced as painful, but it need not be this way. But here he says it must be. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I just find it odd. Babies scream in rage if you take away a knife or scissors, although they may well harm themselves if you do not. Okay, so obviously he's talking about we're the babies, and the knife or the scissors are our ego illusion about ourselves. In this sense, you are still a baby. You have no sense of real self-preservation and are likely to decide that you need precisely what would hurt you most. Yet whether or not you recognize it now, you have agreed to cooperate in the effort to become both harmless and helpful, attributes that must go together. So whether or not we recognize it now, we've already agreed to this. We've already agreed to cooperate in this effort to become harmless and helpful. I mean, how awesome is that? I mean, we've already agreed it's going to happen. Your attitudes, even toward this, are necessarily conflicted because all attitudes are ego based. Okay, so there's still conflict going on. Sometimes in my mind, I'm like, F you, Jesus. I don't want to do, like, I want to hold on to my anger. I want to hold on to my being pissed off. Like, even though I know that I want peace and I want to know my true self and let go of all of this, sometimes not so much. But thankfully, he says now, this will not last. Be patient a while and remember that the outcome is as certain as God. So all those times when I beat myself up, all those times where I forget and I react from my ego, all those times that I didn't live up to the value of the truth that I place on it, like I acted from ego. He's saying, you know what? Don't worry about it. Be patient. And remember that the outcome is as certain as God. Like all is well that ends well, and it ends well. So it's no reason to judge ourselves, no reason to beat ourselves up, think we're not getting it. We're doing it. We're doing the work. Only those who have a real and lasting sense of abundance can be truly charitable. This is obvious when you consider what is involved. To the ego, to give anything implies that you will have to do without it. When you associate giving with sacrifice, you give only because you believe that you are somehow getting something better and can therefore do without the thing you give. Okay? So the ego is all about getting. So if I'm being asked to give something, the ego looks at that and says, okay, well, if I give this, what am I going to get in return? And is the thing I'm going to get in return better than, what I'm willing to give something up for? So to look at that and be, that was huge for me to see, like in every way, that the ego is all about, okay, if I'm going to give something, I better get something back. And I better get something back that's worth the effort that I put in, that was better for it, and I better get something back. And if I don't, then I'm going to have all these resentments because I'm keeping score. I'm keeping score of all the things that I've sacrificed that I haven't gotten back what I think I need yet. Okay. Giving to get is an inescapable law of the ego, which always evaluates itself in relation to other egos. It is therefore continually preoccupied with the belief in scarcity that gave rise to it. Its whole perception of other egos as real is only an attempt to convince itself that it is real. Self-esteem in ego terms means nothing more than that the ego has deluded itself into accepting its reality and is therefore temporarily less predatory. So when we feel good about ourselves, we have good self-esteem, we're temporarily less predatory because we feel like we're in a pretty good place and I'm doing pretty well. So, I can afford to be a little bit more charitable. This self-esteem is always vulnerable to stress, a term which refers to any perceived threat to the ego's existence. Okay, so my self-esteem, I have good self-esteem, I'm feeling good about myself, I'm on top of the world. Then something goes wrong, something goes away that I don't like or I don't want, and that all falls apart. Like I could be 2 minutes later on the floor crying because, oh my God, life is terrible. The ego literally lives by comparisons. Equality is beyond its grasp and charity becomes impossible. The ego never gives out of abundance because it was made as a substitute for it. That is why the concept of getting arose in the ego's thought system. Appetites are getting mechanisms, representing the ego's need to confirm itself. This is as true of body appetites as it is of the so-called higher ego needs. Body appetites are not physical in origin, okay? The ego regards the body as its home and tries to satisfy itself through the body. But the idea that this is possible is a decision of the mind, which has become completely confused about what is really possible. So body appetites, whether that's actual, as we talk, appetites for food, appetites for sex, appetites that we are outsourcing to the body. We're saying it's it's a physical thing. We have to have it. It's a physical thing. It's for our survival. And here you're saying, no, no, no. That is all a decision of the mind. None of that is actually true. You only believe that it's true because it's a decision you've made in your mind. The ego believes it is completely on its own, which is merely another way of describing how it thinks it originated. This is such a fearful state that it can only turn to other egos and try to unite with them in a feeble attempt at identification or attack them in an equally feeble show of strength. Okay, so being an ego, believing that there's an ego, believing that I'm completely on my own, I either have to find allies and join with allies, or I have to attack my enemies. Those are really the only choices. I have these people over here who are enemies that I need to attack and show my strength by attacking them. And or I need to have allies that maybe we all, our enemies are the same. So that's why we're allies. Or maybe we come together as allies and, okay, who's going to be our enemy now? But this whole identification with us and them is because the ego is so afraid because it thinks it's on its own. So it's trying to make all these alliances. Okay. It is not free. Okay. The ego is not free, however, to open the premise to a question because the premise is its foundation, the premise that it's on its own. So it's not going to question that. The ego is the mind's belief that it is completely on its own. So that's all the ego is. It's a thought that I'm on my own. I'm on my own here. God isn't here. I'm on my own. I need to figure it out. I need to protect. I need to provide. I need to do that is the ego. That is the ego is those thoughts that I am on my own. The ego's ceaseless attempts to gain the spirit's acknowledgement and thus establish its own existence are useless. Spirit in its knowledge is unaware of the ego. It does not attack it. It merely cannot conceive of it at all. While the ego is equally unaware of spirit, it does perceive itself as being rejected by something greater than itself. This is why self-esteem in ego terms must be delusional. The creations of God do not create myths, although creative effort can be turned to mythology. It can do so, however, only under one condition, that what it makes is no longer creative. Myths are entirely perceptual and so ambiguous in form and characteristically good and evil in nature that the most can't say the word, malevolent of them is not without fearful connotations. Okay, so some myths, what is he talking about? Myths. Stories, but kind of stories that have become overarching stories, right? Like myths are. So an overarching story that we make up to justify this good and evil and us versus them, they're entirely perceptual. They're not in truth in any way. And once we have used our power, our creative power of our mind to come up with these myths, they are no longer creative because they're based on false perception that there's more than one. Because if there's a good and evil, there has to be two. Myths and magic are closely associated, since myths are usually related to ego origins and magic to the powers the ego ascribes to itself. Mythological systems generally include some account of the creation and associate this with its particular form of magic. The so-called battle for survival is only the ego's struggle to preserve itself and its interpretation of its own beginning. This beginning is usually associated with physical birth because it is hard to maintain that the ego existed before that point in time. The more religiously, the more religiously ego-oriented may believe that the soul existed before and will continue to exist after a temporary lapse into ego life. Some even believe that the soul will be punished for this lapse. However, salvation does not apply to spirit, which is not in danger and does not need to be salvaged. Okay? So your soul does not need to be saved. Okay? If you're using soul as spirit, spirit doesn't need to be saved. You really are, doesn't need to be saved. All of that is a myth. All of that is a story. None of it is true. Salvation is nothing more than right-mindedness, which is not the one-mindedness of the Holy Spirit, but which must be achieved before one-mindedness is restored. Right-mindedness leads to the next step automatically because right perception is uniformly without attack, and therefore wrong-mindedness is obliterated, right? So right-mindedness, when we're on right minds, we don't attack. There is no attack. And so therefore, there is no wrong-mindedness. The ego cannot survive without judgment, and it is laid aside accordingly. When we no longer judge, when we're in right perception and we're not judging, then the ego can't survive because it lives on judgment. The mind then has only one direction in which it can move. Its direction is always automatic because it cannot but be dictated by the thought system to which it adheres. So, if right-mindedness is all that's left, if we're in our right mind, then our mind will automatically continue in that path, okay? Because the ego is gone. Now, like we talked about earlier, this is not, at least for me, right now, it's not a constant state. Right? I can be in my right mind sometimes and I'm in my wrong mind sometimes. And he acknowledges that at the beginning of this section, but it will not last. It cannot be emphasized too often that correcting perception is merely a temporary expedient. It is necessary only because misperception is a block to knowledge, while accurate perception is a stepping stone towards it. So right perception is not our ultimate goal. It's a stepping stone. The whole value of right perception lies in the inevitable realization that all perception is unnecessary. This removes the block entirely. You may ask how this is possible as long as you appear to be living in this world, right? Like I appear to be living in this world. I see things, I perceive things. So how is it possible that to have no perception? Okay. That is a reasonable question. You must be careful, however, that you really understand it. Who is the you who are living in this world? Who is the you who is living in this world? The ego, the body, the belief that I am a body in this world, which is ego. Spirit is immortal, and immortality is a constant state. It is as true now as it ever was or ever will be, because it implies no change at all. It is not a continuum, nor is it understood by being compared to an opposite. Knowledge never involves comparisons. That is its main difference from everything else the mind can grasp. And that's the end of the section. So, to me, this section, he's really laying down why we want right-mindedness, making a case for this is why we want right-mindedness. Don't judge yourself if you're sometimes in your right mind and sometimes in your wrong mind. that's how this works. But it will eventually go away. We will eventually give it up completely. And then we will be free and know that we are loved as the creations of God. So thank you so much for being here and watching this video. Subscribe if you liked it so you can see when the next one comes. And I love you so much. Bye-bye.